The title of our next panel, the first of three, as I mentioned, is Driving Employment and Investment in Greater Western Sydney. And I see we have a moderator available. I'm hoping he has some panellists to join him on stage. So I would like to invite our panel to the stage. Leanne Bloch-Jorgensen is the Head of Thought Leadership at NAB. Rebecca Murray is Vice Principal Strategy at the University of Sydney. Kerry Penton is Acting MD of TAFE New South Wales. Rebecca Razavi is the Executive Director, Industry, Jobs and Innovation at New South Wales Treasury. And our moderator is Dr. Andy Marks, and Andy is Assistant Vice-Chancellor at Western Sydney University. So please make them welcome.
Okay, we've got the after lunch shift, which is always electrifying. Electrifying. So we'll just try and get you out of your food coma a little bit if we can. And I want to sort of touch on some of the stuff that's unfolded through the course of the day. But I'm going to start out with Leanne. So have a drink. You want to?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a long question.
Good.
So we've heard all about the imperatives for Western Sydney and about the scale of what's occurring in terms of infrastructure. We've learned a little bit about what Western Sydney looks like from East London, and Leanne was on that trip as well, and it was gruesome. The schedule that Brownie set was just, it was soul-destroying. It was beautiful. But it was a really productive trip. Yes. Because we got to see, I think, things, as I said, through a different lens about what's possible in leveraging off infrastructure. The Docklands Light Rail, case in point, and the way that businesses are prepared to fund that. So I'm going to ask you, Leanne, given the monumental scale of the jobs and investment imperatives for Western Sydney, do we need to do things differently than we've done elsewhere across Sydney or in Australia?
Yeah, I'd probably answer that question maybe two ways. One is, what do we need to do differently in Western Sydney compared to the rest of Sydney? And I think, to me, the big piece there is really around the demographics. So we all know about the growth of Western Sydney and the pace of growth, which is significantly higher than the rest of Sydney. But I think there's something quite interesting in the nature of the labour market of Western Sydney, and those differences are really around, how are people employed? And the people of Western Sydney are more likely to be in trade-related jobs or unskilled labour versus the rest of Sydney. And I think there's something quite important in that we need to think about differently. And the other piece that picks up on that too, which is an education issue, is that there are lower high school retention rates in Western Sydney. So I think there's something there that we need to think about. And I'm sure we'll dig into that a bit more deeply today. The other piece that I think is different, although we need to think differently about, is how do we think about Western Sydney differently? And that's really around the spatial nature of Western Sydney. And I think something we really saw in East London, in that when you're trying to grow and grow well in a confined space, sometimes you do that better.
And we have the opposite problem, of course.
Exactly,
yeah.
We have the opposite problem. So I would say, to answer that question, what do we need to do differently in Western Sydney compared to what we've done before in Western Sydney? It is to actually think about how do we do density better.
Yeah.
And I think that, with density comes all the other, positive benefits around jobs, communities, and all the other social outcomes that are much more likely to be higher versus the kind of the urban sprawl, where people are further and further kind of distanced from their places of work.
This is going to be an absolutely wonderful segue, because, Rebecca, we talked a little bit earlier about an urban shift that you've described as being required for Western Sydney. And that might be spatial, but it might be a whole lot of things. And I think one thing that we both agree on is that universities can be at the heart of that shift. Can you describe what that looks like?
Sure. So Leanne made the point about the population growth and the trajectory towards Western Sydney. And of course, as a university, we want to be where the people in the community are. So that was largely a part of our thinking about in relation to expanding presence in Western Sydney. Now, universities do two fundamental things. They provide education and they undertake research. So my university currently has about 70,000 students here in Sydney as it is today, and I think, Andy, yours has about 50,000?
Roughly that, yeah.
So we're talking 120,000 student population just in two institutions in our city today. And as we project for growth and as we think about the needs of a Western Sydney community, I think they deserve access to university. I think they deserve choices in relation to that. And we know that while retention rates in high school may not be great today, it is a hugely aspirational community. And we ourselves looked at the proportion of growth that would happen in Western Sydney and the extent to which, you know, a young population, the size of that growth and who would be needing an educational opportunity like university. And we think it's really significant. And I think there's a role for all of our universities in the way that we are thinking about providing opportunity for young people to become leaders, future leaders and future leaders of industry. So I think the scale is enormous. And it's a huge population that we ought to be thinking about serving. In relation to research, though, we've also undertaken some modelling. We know that for every dollar invested in a Group 8 university in research activity, we can contribute around $10 each into the economy. So research is a really important economic driver as much as it is about providing transformational solutions for people in their life. But research is also highly collaborative. It's highly collaborative both domestically and internationally. And that's the other benefit, I think, that we need to think about in relation to having universities based in innovation precincts and drivers of change in Western Sydney, because we provide visibility. We provide visibility locally, and we provide sites that attract international talent and sites that actually enable our local students to then create relationships globally. And I think we can't understate the impact of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the group of 32 do okay too. That's the rest of us. I actually wanted to stay on the education theme because I think it is very much a catalytic thing, Rebecca, as you've outlined. I think that, Kerry, we've seen a lot of dialogue recently from the highest levels of state government about the need to rethink the way that we do TAFE and reinvigorate it and reimagine it. And also look more towards some of those industry-embedded cultures they have in Europe, for example, with training. What does that look like for TAFE in Western Sydney?
I think for me, having been in the sector for a number of years, the really exciting part about being in the sector now is that level of conversation that's happening at all levels of government. It's happening across the sector, educationally, both in school education, the vet sector and the university sector, and it's happening in collaboration with employers. So when you look at what's happening in Western Sydney and the size and scale, I think it actually provides another advantage, is that we're moving into new territory with new opportunities. So, and I often sort of say there's enough work for everyone, and where you've got that sort of circumstance, it does enable collaboration more closely and a greater openness. So, the sort of areas that I've been having discussions are at the table with the universities and TAFE, with SMEs, with the large employers, and a really great conversation happening around the nature of vocational education and training, the structure of qualifications, the speed at which we deliver qualifications, and the development of them. It has to be more agile. You know, 5 years to develop a training package and then get it to the market is too long, and we've got to continue to catch up with industry. So there's a few bits for us in that. We've been going through quite a bit of change, as most people will know. So in the background, we've been doing a lot of work around how we connect with industry with our new skills points, how we deliver training and the way we deliver it in a more agile way with the development of our skills exchange. So they're on-site, real-time. But for me, the really exciting part is the coming together of the educational areas, because it is about young people and their aspiration and their ability to connect to education and training. But to have the partners together there with industry designing and co-developing and co-designing opportunities and outcomes, whether they're skill sets, just-in-time training, through to new models of integrated training from entry-level to through vet and through to degree, in these collaborative models is really exciting. And the really exciting piece for me is it's being driven through the voice of employers and the voice of industry.
Yeah.
And so, so that pace, because certainly what I've seen is if we can't keep up as a sector, educationally, and it doesn't matter which part of the sector it is, employers have to keep moving because the pressure on employers is so great. The technology is moving so fast that the area of non-accredited training, the development of how we deliver training with AR and VR, which we're doing a lot of investment in through our TAFE Digital campus, is a really exciting time in the way training's developed, the way it's delivered, and the way that those who are receiving the training then absorb it and take ownership of their own training. I think the thing I would say, though, the challenge for, government's certainly leaning in and the investment that the state government's having out in Western Sydney for us alone, as well as everything else we've talked about over the last...
It's pretty substantial, isn't it?
It's pretty substantial. So it is on a size and scale to keep step, and that complements our existing activity out there, as I said, with new ways of learning. I think the other thing for me is it is about the here and now, and it's the sheer numbers and the size and scale. But then it's the legacy piece about how do people continue to learn, continue to adjust and move from industry to industry. So it is about the immediate developing technical skills and the new innovation and particularly in advanced manufacturing. But it's also then about that broader community which we talked about last night and during today. It's then how do we support health? How do we support those that are accessing transport? All of the allied and support trades.
Fundamentals, yeah.
All of the fundamentals that go to running a city and living in a city and being part of a city, and more broadly. I think that's where I'm most excited because we are on a size and scale of no other. We do all of that as well.
Yeah.
And the work that we're doing with employers now in really challenging the way we develop training and deliver training, I think will benefit those other industries from that perspective.
Well, that actually draws in, again, the issue of collaboration too, which I wanted to pick up with Rebecca from Treasury, about the fact that Western Sydney seems to be the site of an unprecedented level of collaboration. I know certainly between universities and TAFE, we're constantly reworking the models, and in particular at the moment around the Aerotropolis. I'll talk to you about that later. Rebecca, what role does government have, and Treasury in particular, in drawing in investment to support these collaborations? Because we have all this wonderful momentum in terms of people engaging and cross-pollinating. How can Treasury and other agencies help push that along?
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I think on this question of sort of collaboration, it is just worth pausing, and I'm sure this has been a broader theme, that it is remarkable the level of collaboration that's happening at every level of government, across the industry, across our education sector, and it's, we really should be very kind of proud of that. What we are doing in itself is innovative. And you think about just the sort of volume of the types of collaborations we're seeing across Western Sydney, and from really major flagship things like the at the Aerotropolis, and the sophistication and kind of level of complexity of collaboration that's happening there. It's truly something that the government's innovating at every step in what it does, and trying to work with partners in a new way, be that kind of engaging internationally, in terms of really sort of advocating those key new industries that the Aerotropolis is trying to foster, and thinking about how do we create that kind of pipeline of investment into those, but yet integrate that with our skills piece. That whole, we're trying to look at things very holistically, and I think this also points to the sort of, I guess, the spatial dimension. So in a way, because we're focusing on a geography, and I know there's multi-parts to the geography and sort of all sorts of dynamics to that, but essentially, it's a very strong message that's getting out there to the world that there's something very important going on in Western Sydney. And when you think about already the progress that, say, at the Aerotropolis that's occurred in terms of the MOU agreements, the recent announcement with Hitachi, starting to see that this is globally significant in terms of these sorts of development and the ambition that we've got. And I think that it's, this really plays to, sometimes people wonder, apart from, we talked about the hard infrastructure and money bits already at length for the programme, but I call it the sort of soft infrastructure bits that, from a sort of wider Treasury point of view, not everyone is fully, I think, aware, but after the last election and machinery government changes, we have our economic development work around trade and investment, industry, jobs and innovation, and sort of precincts work sitting within that Treasury cluster. And it's absolutely very much sort of part of our focus to think about, well, what does that then look like and translate into from a Western Sydney context? Obviously, we look across the...
Well, that gives you much greater leverage, doesn't it, through Treasury in terms of having the nexus with all of those other areas that used to float across various departments. So what's really new for you about that?
What's really exciting for me about that is this sort of integration piece. So when we think about, let's say we're looking at questions around industry development or advanced manufacturing, what are the other sort of pieces that need to come together there? And we look explicitly at, say, a precincts level, and we look at that sort of focus that's going on at Aerotropolis, which will be a sort of a core component of how we look at advancing into Industry 4.0. But then we're able to look at, we're very much looking at what does that mean in terms of jobs, of course, and what does that mean in terms of the wider sort of skills development, and then how do we integrate both the kind of trade support that we provide, and we've actually just recently put 2 new trade export advisors into Western Sydney to specifically look at SMEs in Western Sydney and how we can kind of help them grow in terms of their capacity to export. But it's things like that where you can begin to bring all those
So little step
together.
changes in maybe technology uptake and other things that can help open up new opportunities. I think that the interesting thing is having those areas within Treasury. Is there that tension between wanting to rein in spending and then also have that sort of segue into development as well?
That's always a tension.
Yeah, I thought it might be. Be an interesting
The
one.
mother of invention to have that kind of tension. Yeah. Look, I mean, what we're trying to do is, and that's I guess at the heart of this, we're trying to use the resources we've got as effectively as we can, and in as focused a way as we can. Yeah. And I guess that's what's very powerful about the collaboration that's going on. And even the sort of mechanics of the Western Sydney City deal itself, that's 3 levels of government, connected into those other players there. We're all trying to bring our pieces together so that, we're pulling in the same direction, I guess.
Yeah. Leanne, I'm going to ask you to probably think about something that our friends at WACA think about every night, probably keeps Sam awake of an evening, which is really about the fact that you've got this wonderful opportunity in terms of the international corporates that have signed up to be foundational tenants at the Aerotropolis. They're all there waiting for the starter gun to go off. How do we make sure that we don't miss our moment? And how do we leverage those opportunities in greenfield sites like the Aerotropolis and not miss the wave?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I guess I don't worry about us missing the moment partly because and I think Rebecca just really outlined how attractive this is as an opportunity and how this is really standing out to the rest of the world. And it is indeed such a unique, once in our lifetime probably, opportunity to work with a greenfield site like this. And so I think that we're so well set up to take advantage, that's probably not the right word. We're so well set up to maximise the opportunity, and I think that's really come from exactly what Rebecca has just said around not just the planning but also the collaboration. Really I think one of the first times that we've had that mixture of the public-private university, the breadth of sector, really think about how do we actually create this vision and stay true to that vision. And so to me, will we miss out on some of these large international corporates because we're not ready? I mean, I'm sure timelines will shift a little bit, but that's sort of expected. So I don't know that we miss out on that. I think the real risk is probably more making sure that that we stay true to the vision, because if
Yeah.
we think about, what is the Aerotropolis? It's not just an airport. It's really this, creating this whole new economic, lifestyle, productive corridor that really has a sense of place. And so I think that's really the vision, and I think part of that has to be what's the mix of the companies who are there. So I think the first piece is who should we say yes to, and who else do we need? And then I think probably the other piece is thinking about the broader Aerotropolis and the kind of the outer rim, and the border cities, the places like Liverpool, because I think we're quite focused on who are the big anchors that we want to attract into the Aerotropolis, but it's also that broader, all the other border cities and all the, who are the smaller companies? What else do we need out there, and how do we actually create?
So that means too, like thinking about how we activate Liverpool and Campbelltown and Penrith, those cities constituting the city deal space, I guess, in a way too, just as much as the Aerotropolis space. Yeah. We'll come back to that question, but I wanted to turn to you, Rebecca. Another question from the USyd perspective about the way universities, and certainly both of our universities of late have been really undergoing a step change in the way that we activate precincts. Universities have long worked closely with hospitals and been involved in those types of arrangements and clusters. But now we're talking about universities being very much urban transformers as well. What's that look like on the ground in places like Westmead? And I know that you can probably only say so much about that at this point, but what have you got in mind for Westmead?
So why Westmead? We think Westmead is particularly special. It's one of the largest health precincts in the Southern Hemisphere. We've had a relationship with that health precinct for more than 40 years. We have very close ties there. But part of the reason for Westmead was that we were in conversation with the leadership of the area about things like, what does the future of health look like, and can we sustain a health model as it currently is, and are there other resources of the university that could come to bear when it came to grappling with those kinds of questions, which is why it created the opportunity for us to think about, are there ways in which we could do something more than health? And then as the investment in the precinct became more and more apparent, the aspiration of the partners in the precinct became apparent, and the sense that it was going to be a place where innovation was incredibly important. All of those things together really drove our decision to want to continue to be a part of it. So it was about thinking about health differently, thinking about the fact that the problems of today and the future are going to require multidisciplinary responses to them, and that created an enormous opportunity for us to bring other parts of our university into the conversation. But particularly, I want to stress the collaboration point again, because the features of the precincts that we're talking about, whether it be Westmead, whether it be Aerotropolis or in the city, is that you're bringing together different organisations to come together to behave differently than that which they would on their own. So we're expecting greater things from this collaboration. And so in that, I think it's important that we're valuing the fact that we're trying new models, both within our organisations and with others, whether they be public sector, whether it's industry, whether it's community organisations, our TAFEs and others. But we're agreeing to behave differently as part of that collaboration. And that means testing new models. And more that means inviting community in. So people talked earlier about co-creation, and so whether that's in thinking about how you incubate and build entrepreneurship through a student population, through to our clinicians, researchers and so on, and together with our industry, and how to fast-track innovation in that sense. That means how do we think about models like living labs, where you actually have a closer connection to the community that you're working with, and they are participant in and leaders of the research and the outcomes as well. And it also means how does the precinct open itself up to all of these partners and to community, and to provide access and a sense of porousness to the site? How do you provide access to the facilities that institutions like ours can provide, whether they be academic or cultural? So I think we're imagining precincts that have all of those features that cultivate a culture of collaboration, but collaboration with purpose, and a culture of openness and access to industry, community and others.
I've got a question from the floor. It's absolutely incredible. It's like War and Peace. It's 2 pages. It's going to be good. To Kerry and Rebecca. Well, there's any number of possibilities here. There's been a lot of discussion around the future of work. How is the tertiary education sector planning for this? I'm not quite sure. Where are the future jobs going to be? Talking about innovation is getting a little tiresome. Is it time to recalibrate our tax incentives for R&D to get some real commercially scalable innovation to drive jobs and exports in areas like advanced manufacturing? Is the federal government doing enough? Incredible. We got a name for that? Who put that one in? That's a beauty. Thanks, mate. Would you guys want to take one or part of that on?
I'll start.
R&D incentives, maybe, or?
Look, again, I think what I'm seeing is that these, the positive part is these conversations are happening, and beyond that, there are real-time trials, innovative models that are in practice right now. And are being developed. So I do know that people worry about, well, how much can you keep talking without doing? And that's often a frustration that people feel. And the future of work, it is the sort of the fundamental question on people's mind is, if you've got a young person that's 12 or 11 now, what's their working life going to look like? It's going to be considerably different to ours. And it is this notion of skills and development and new technology. But as we've just sort of heard about, it is all of the other things that we're all trying to do right now that we're talking about, but that's innovative. It is around this notion of collaboration. And then having precincts where we're all in there together and we're all just navigating and integrating the work that we do and all of the services that we provide. Now, that's really the future for a lot of young people and those that are already in the workforce. We talk about technical skills and advanced technical skills and the new skills that are coming and the new jobs that are coming, and how you can create the opportunities for those, which is really important. But the other part around it is what's traditionally known as soft skills, which are actually, I think, the hard skills. If you can't collaborate in the workforce, if you can't communicate, if you can't be resilient, if you can't think laterally, if you can't navigate the fact that you are a tradie today and in 10 years' time you actually might be in the health area.
So we're not really then building for disciplines. We're getting foundational skills bedded down, but we're actually wanting to really foster critical thinking as much as we foster capacity in STEM and other techniques.
Absolutely, and this is where the conversation is now broadening, and I think that that's the exciting part. When you talked earlier around the tradition of the models of delivery of VET, in Germany, they're great models and they're quite foundational models. Over there, though, there's a lot of investment from industry. Both in time and effort. When we talk about delivering training in some of these really emerging industries, if industry out there has a skills shortage, we in TAFE have a skills shortage, because if we can't get your people to come and work with us, or if you can't lend them, if we can't be working together to have co-employment, co-development, co-design's one thing, then co-delivery, we have skill shortages too. So it's this integration piece, and then knowing that you can't discount the hard skills and needing to be adaptable and be able to take that on in a very different way and much faster than historically, but it's all the other skills that need to go with it, and that's where we're seeing a change in the discussion.
And that's where you need that real mobility across sectors as well.
Yes.
And I think that's something you might want to touch on.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree with you more. I think part of the tension in all of this is that on the one hand, industry says that we want work-ready graduates. On the other, you're dealing with the live question of what is the future of work and what are the roles that will come down the line in future. So having a connected conversation about those fundamental skills like critical thinking and designing that in at a time where, and doing it together with industry is particularly important, whether it be in vet or whether it be in the university system.
So we still need more poets, right?
Absolutely.
Always. Yeah. That's wonderful news.
But I would say, sorry,
yes.
Andy, I do think there is a job of work to do, and I said this recently in another forum, to look at some educational journey mapping that we can do. And if we take advanced manufacturing as a great example of it, how is it that if we're saying our city needs 200,000 more jobs of a type and we want to have them available for a new population of people, how do we start thinking about equipping them across that learning journey to be able to access them when they've arrived?
Yeah.
And just the other thing I would add to that is just really around this, I guess, the future of jobs or the future of work. We really don't know what it will look like, and we worked on a report with the CSIRO earlier this year that looks at Australia in 2060, and the report talks a lot about an industry shift that's required. And it doesn't tell you what the jobs will actually be because we don't know. And all we know is that the pace of change and the pace of these, what is required is unprecedented in terms of that pace. But what it did do is it actually looked at all the data on what is the impact. We talk about technology and the impact of technology on jobs. And the jury is really out on whether or not it's a net creator or a net detractor or a remover of jobs. But the interesting piece under that, though, was just back to the point that I think we're all making is around what is the nature of those others, what are the skills that you need to be able to be agile so that you are ready for these jobs. And the analysis on that really found that really it is, it is about how easily can you pick up new technology. So how agile can you be?
It's mobility, isn't it? And I think this is what was exciting about your comment, Rebecca, earlier on about people behaving differently in a precinct or collaboration environment. So it forces us to be agile just by being together, let alone trying to anticipate what's coming down the line career-wise. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, Andy, I just wanted a couple of things. One was to respond to this question around R&D.
Oh, thank you. Good.
It's a really good and very important question. Australia has a problem overall with R&D commercialisation. We know that. And there are, lots of ideas around solutions out there. I won't comment on federal government issues, but I will just say that it's something that certainly at the state government level, there's a lot of kind of thinking going on around that at the moment. And Gabrielle Upton's leading a piece of work for the government looking at this very question and seeking inputs on it. So I think it was a really good one to raise. We do have programs that are underway already to look at kind of boosting innovation and connecting business, industry, but especially kind of growing businesses into research and building those collaborations.
What about startup level too in R&D?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking, and because you guys are state, different jurisdiction, you can take out the bat a little bit. What are we thinking when we have so much of our incentives for R&D tied up as a tax dodge? Is that any way to run research and development in a country like Australia?
I think I'd prefer to focus on what else is it that we can do rather than get down into the rabbit warren of the tax.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of other... that is not a magic bullet in itself.
No. But it just seems to me, though, that there's an opportunity for the state government to be a little bit more progressive than perhaps the federal cousins have been in that regard. And we have this burgeoning system that we're kind of stuck with in many respects that's not perfect. But I like the idea that the state government can be more agile, perhaps.
Yeah. And there's also, there's lots of good examples out there in terms of, what are other things you can do to think about and, driving kind of research focus that leads to commercialisation. So, we're trying to look at the whole set of things. And there's definitely been a lot of kind of enthusiasm for us beginning to look at this issue in more detail.
I think you kind of answered my next question to you, which was about the fact that we're seeing so much government involvement in Western Sydney, and we talked earlier about typically, only 3 to 4 years ago, people were saying good government sets the conditions and then gets out of the way. But government's all over Western Sydney, city deals. I think that we've got more government than we've ever had. Are we breaking the rules? And is this current system working?
That's a really good question. Look, I don't think government's just about regulation. I think government's about trying to create kind of an enablement platform. And a significant chunk of that is trying to bring, parties together. So I think, very much has a role in that collaboration piece. I have the same sympathy as every other individual, taking my government hat off, as, we don't want government to be in places that it shouldn't be, and we don't want it to be, making things more complicated than they need to be. But there is, we should want our government to be concerned and actively engaged on all of these issues and trying to be a facilitator. And I guess that's what, we see our role as being. And as I mentioned before, trying to bring that kind of whole force of different things that the government's trying to work on, as a partner with others, to bring that kind of whole set of things together in a more cohesive way and work collaboratively.
So we've got a little bit of time left, and without any other questions from the floor, I'm going to ask you all for your Twitter response, which is the kind of 140 characters or less version. Flash forward 20 years, we've hit the 200,000 jobs target, hopefully. What's Western Sydney going to look like in terms of jobs and employment 20 years from now? Are we still going to have the imbalance? Do you want to start?
I would like to think not. I think what success looks like is this notion of inclusivity, because it is a very diverse community. And when we're thinking about and doing all of the change, just ensuring that those who are least able can see themselves as part of that future, and that we do today that enables them to have the wherewithal and the access and the opportunity to be part of that exciting future, no matter what their background.
That's great, perfect. You want to have a crack at that?
Yep. I think for me, it's just, looking forward into that vision it's just a hashtag, which is like future made here. That's it. You don't need to go anywhere else. You're making the future right there.
Excellent. Thoroughly global. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I would feel very optimistic about what that looks like. And, I think if we go back 20 years and look at how differently, maybe that may or may not be the right proxy, but Western Sydney was very different 20 years ago. And, and I think that aspiration point I think that you brought out about young people, I think is actually one of the big drivers that you really expect to see come to fruition. So I think 2040 looks pretty good.
Great.
I'd hate to think that we're still having conversations about East and West in 20 years' time, and that there is a real sense of confidence and identity in the way that we describe the parts of our city that may be different, ought to be different based on the communities that make them, but that we're not continuing this conversation, but they are vibrant, that there is, as I said before, a real sense that Western Sydney is actually a place where people internationally know and come from and want to be part of. And I think that we've got a real chance of making that a reality.
Wonderful. I'm thoroughly confident. Look, please join me in thanking our panellists.